Hello and welcome back to week 6 of your Living FDFD group. I'm excited that you're here today. Now, here's a big question. How do you know that your life is worth something? Maybe another way to ask this question would be, how do I justify my own existence? You see, this question has been asked for pretty much all of human history. We all share this longing to understand if our lives have intrinsic value. In our homework this week, we took a deep dive into the idea of justification. To some of you, this might seem like a fancy, churchy word, but in reality, justification just simply represents the idea that through placing our trust in Jesus Christ, we have been made right with God. Our reconciliation is complete. The good news is we don't have to justify ourselves. That's a huge gift in and of itself. Instead, we trade our fear and insecurities for Christ's righteousness. No longer do we have to feel burdened or trapped by our own works, but instead we get to live in delight because of Christ's free gift to us. In fact, we see in 1 John 4:18 that the perfect love of Christ drives out fear. You see, fear can be driven by a fear of punishment. And fear of punishment is consistent with all forms of religion. Contrast that with the gospel, which focuses on love and gratitude for Christ. The kind of faith that saves is justifying faith. It is trusting that Jesus told the truth about who He was and about His solution to our sin problem, and that He did what He needed to do to satisfy God's justice as our substitute. This kind of faith leads us to full devotion and full delight in Jesus. Ultimately, it is our love for Christ that motivates us to trust Him in our everyday lives. Now, when He commands us, we are happy to do what He says because we know that He has our best interests at heart. An important first step for every believer is trusting God enough to do what He says. And that's what it means to take delight in His authority. Not only does justifying faith encompass doing what God says, but it goes deeper than that and asks us to receive our identity from Him. We've talked about these things. In other words, we are who He says we are, not what the world says we are. This might seem like a big ask from God, but it beats getting our identity from what we do and what we accomplish. When our identity is in Christ, we are loved unconditionally. When our identity is in Christ, we now know forgiveness permanently. And on top of that, there is nothing we can do to get God to love us more or get God to love us less. And when we consider all of this and live in this reality, we can experience joy. And here's the exciting thing about these two ways we can exercise trust. It naturally leads to a third amazing trust, and that is the desire to do for others what Christ has done for us. No longer is our motivation for helping others driven by our desire to justify ourselves, but now we can simply love others the way we have been loved by Christ. There is one thing that God asks of us, that we trust Him. That trust should be applied to these three areas in our life: authority, identity, and activity. These three commitments we can make to God make up what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. By the way, we are never done growing in these three areas. We're never done growing in our trust for God. To start off today's discussion, I think this question would be helpful for your group to answer, and that is this. What have you tried to use as a means of self-justification? What have you pointed to other than Christ as a way to prove that you are somebody, that you matter, that you have worth? What I want to do now is hand this time back over to you and your group leader, and remember that we are all in this journey together. We have all used different forms of justification to prove ourselves that our lives have meaning or worth. This upcoming week is your last week of homework. Week 7 gets right to the heart of this workbook, taking our next step with Jesus. My hope is that you would take the time to carefully and prayerfully work through this next week's chapter and come prepared to share with your group. As always, I thank you for being a part of this group, and I sincerely believe that you can walk away from this study being more devoted and delighted in Jesus Christ. See you next week.